Well, hello everybody. My name is Rob Schenk. I'm the Chief Museum Content Officer for the National Medal of Honor Museum. And I'm here on the Gettysburg battlefield on a really beautiful day. And we're here to really talk about the Medal of Honor, its birth during the Civil War itself, and the Battle of Gettysburg. So it's a really exciting day and a chance to kind of delve into this really interesting topic. So as many of you know, the Medal of Honor was first signed into law in December of 1861. The Navy version was signed first, followed by the Army version in July of 1862. The medal was unique in that there was no other active military decoration available at the time. Yes, there had been some preceding decorations, most notably Washington's Military Badge of Merit in 1782, but by the time of the Civil War, awards of this nature are unknowns. There's no Silver Star, there's no Bronze Star, there's no Distinguished Service Cross. And we'll talk a little bit later about the different criteria used in the Civil War to make these sorts of awards. I'm excited today to also have some friends and experts here on the battle, and I first want to introduce Wayne Motts. Wayne is the president of the National Civil War Museum in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and Wayne has brought out a real treasure for us to take a look at. So Wayne, what do you have with you?
Yes, well thank you, Rob, for allowing us to be part of this. I have an original Medal of Honor which belonged to Joseph B. Chambers, and this Medal of Honor is from 1871. It was awarded to him in 1871. It's the original Medal of Honor design. And Joseph Chambers was from eastern Pennsylvania and also lived, his native really is western Pennsylvania, his native place, and he died in 1909. And he got this as a member of the 100th Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry Regiment.
Wayne, that is so cool to see, and maybe I thought we kind of just point out some of the design elements. For many of you familiar with today's Medal of Honor, you're probably surprised to see this earlier and very different design. So just to kind of highlight what a Medal of Honor looked like in the Civil War, first it starts with the 5-pointed bronze star, which you can see here. And in the center, and this is the Army version, you can see this allegory here of Union fighting discord. So again, remember, this is an award that's being created during the Civil War, so it's very much an allegory as to defeating the Confederacy. So here you see Minerva, she's wielding her Union encrusted shield and she's smashing Discord, who's got a fistful of snakes in its hand. Around that allegory are 34 stars, 34 states are represented, including the Confederate states. So again, maybe kind of a hopeful instance of what the Union forces were fighting for. Above, you'll see the ribbon here in its kind of patriotic red, white, and blue, evocative of the American or Union flag. And again, the Army version, as different from the Navy version, the Army version here has a clasp which includes an eagle, crossed cannons, a sword, and cannonballs. The Navy version, if you're seeing one as it does today, includes an anchor in which the flukes are used to hang the 5-pointed star. So it's really fascinating to see this. And I thought one other thing which is really not known about a lot of Medals of Honor is typically on the backside you'll see an engraving. Now this one's encased, so we're not going to see that here, but Wayne, you brought some others.
I sure did. So we also have, Rob, 2 medals that belong to the same person. This is the 1896 design, which you will describe. This one belonged to James Vernay, and Vernay was an officer in the 11th Illinois Infantry Regiment, and he got it for action at Vicksburg while in command of a gunboat. And I'll try to flip it over here so you can see it. It is inscribed to him, as you mentioned, here on the back.
So you can really see, this is really what makes each of these medals very unique. And again, when you see different medals throughout the different generations, you'll see these specific engravings, which is really fantastic. And wow, that's just remarkable to see that. Again, the ribbon color is the primary difference with this later version. Again, you can see it's a different style. There were concerns around other decorations that started to show up, primarily with the Grand Army of the Republic medals. And you'll see them, and they look very much like old Medals of Honor. And there was a concern that there would be confusion between those medals and the true Medal of Honor. So they started to change the design here. And only later in the early 20th century do you see things starting to kind of shift more toward the powder blue and star motifs that we know and associate with the Medal of Honor today. So that's fantastic to see, Wayne.
Yeah, so James Vernay lived long enough, Rob, to actually get the later version of the medal.
Yeah, wow, look.
And here it is. Let me get it in the right. These are all in the original box, by the way.
That's
These are
fantastic.
the original boxes. This is the 1904 design that you were just mentioning. And this belonged to James Verney as well. He did not die till 1918, so he has both designs here.
That's remarkable. So you can see the changes here again, the different colors which we associate with the Medal of Honor today. A more simplified Army clasp, gone are the cannons, the cannonballs. You see the word valor now showing up. And the motif, which again had been Union fighting discord, has now been simplified into just showing Minerva's head.
And then I'll flip it over because it also, whoops, let me just, right here, gotta be very careful with it. Here we go.
Wow, look.
So that's inscribed as well.
Remarkable.
James Verney.
What a tremendous, and you can see the Congress too. So again, sometimes the Medal of Honor is called the Congressional Medal of Honor, and you can see those references here on the medal design. Wayne, that is so awesome that you were able to bring them out and here on the Gettysburg battlefield.
Well, thanks
what
for,
an amazing
thanks
thing,
for,
and what a great institution you represent, and we're excited to have you here with us today. And we'll talk a lot more about Civil War Medal of Honor recipients today.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it.
You got it. I'm also here with good friend and expert Gary Edelman, who's the chief historian of the American Battlefield Trust, and Gary is a licensed Gettysburg battlefield guide and real expert here. Gary, great to have you here, and let's talk about kind of the Battle of Gettysburg, the Civil War, and the Medal of Honor.
Wow, that's easy. What a pleasure to be here in my favorite place. And, you know, when you look at the Civil War, you go through the whole first year of the Civil War. That's 1861, where the Medal of Honor really isn't any sort of an issue. It's not authorized for Army soldiers yet. So you really have Medals of Honor creeping in the second year of the Civil War in 1862. But here we are on the Gettysburg battlefield, one of the 10,000 battles and skirmishes during the Civil War. And there are 74 Medals of Honor awarded, during this particular campaign as General Robert E. Lee's army advanced into Pennsylvania and retreated away. There are numerous actions, and of those 73 Medals of Honor awarded for this campaign, 64 are awarded on one of the 3 days of the Battle of Gettysburg, July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 1863. There are some on July 1st. There are more medals awarded for actions on July 2nd, and there are even more medals awarded on July 3rd. So what you have is really a situation where Gettysburg serves as a microcosm for the entire Civil War, where you have so many medals awarded here. You tend to see medals awarded for things like conspicuous gallantry or meritorious conduct. That might be called above the call of duty in today's vernacular. So what that means during the Civil War is it could be that you were protecting your comrades and your fellow soldiers from harm. It could be you were holding off the enemy, sometimes single-handedly working a cannon or something like that. It could be that you were rescuing a wounded comrade, or it could be that you were capturing or preserving a flag. And I want to talk about that for a quick second, because the flags are known as the colors of the Civil War. They are not only a point of honor for a regiment, the standard fighting unit in the Civil War, but they are also very important to help guide a regiment, to help move a regiment, and they are very important to that particular regiment. So maintaining your flag is important, and capturing an enemy's flag is important. And numerous citations, numerous Medal of Honor recipients for this particular battle would be awarded the Medal of Honor, some during the Civil War, but even more after the Civil War, after they were veterans, for capturing or preserving some sort of a flag or a color during the Civil War. Now, during this particular battle, this is July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 1863. We're on the first day's battlefield. These are massive struggles. This battlefield is 25 square miles, and it takes a lot more than a few videos to see the whole thing. But if you go around, the places where the deeds were performed that resulted in these Medals of Honor are still there.
Recipient that we're going to talk about is Corporal Francis Waller of the 6th Wisconsin Infantry, and he fought on the first day, on that July 1st, 1863. Now, of the 64 recipients in the battle proper, 10 are from the first day. So we're going to talk to Gary about Waller and why he deserved it. But first, let me read his very simple citation. Again, this is one thing that's very different about Civil War citations from modern citations, which are paragraph after paragraph. His citation is one quick sentence: capture of flag of 2nd Mississippi Infantry, CSA. So Gary, what did Waller do, and why did he earn the Medal of Honor?
Thanks, Rob. So I'm Gary Edelman, Chief Historian at the American Battlefield Trust, and this is my favorite place, and the Trust preserves battlefields. So how great is it that we can come to the place where Francis Asbury Waller, goes by Frank, was in battle with his brother on July 1st, 1863. But first, you got to know what's happening. This is a massive battle involving 28,000 Confederates and 18,000 Union soldiers, and I won't go into all that, but know this, there's an intense struggle going on over my right shoulder, off to the left there. The Union's holding their own pretty well, but in the fields that you can see behind me, the Confederates, North Carolinians and Mississippians, have worked their way around the Union soldiers into that field behind me, to the point where they occupy the railroad grade that you can probably see behind me here. The tracks weren't there, but they had made plans for it, laid the bed, and made cuts through the ridge behind me. A great place to be, for the Confederates to be, for the 2nd Mississippi to be, in that cut behind me there. That is until the enemy can charge and point their guns down on you in the cut. But the Mississippians are strong, they have a lot of soldiers there, and they take their flag, their colors, the center of their regiment, and they plant it in the side of the embankment over there. And the 6th Wisconsin, that's a regiment, 300 or 400 soldiers here at this battle, are in position about 200 yards behind the camera, and they realize that this Confederate force threatens the entire rear of the Union Army over there, and the 6th Wisconsin is sent up to blunt that Confederate movement. Along with some help from some New York soldiers as well, the Wisconsin soldiers begin a brutal, a gallant charge from the Chambersburg Pike, which you can see or hear off of there, and then they begin the charge. And at every step, literally, at every one of the roughly 120 steps to get from that road to this railroad embankment, a Wisconsin man falls. Several men see the Confederate flag lodged in the side of the embankment over there. Several Union soldiers, the Wisconsin men, make a lunge for it. The Confederates parry, thrust, and shoot the Union soldiers who are trying, and that's when Francis Waller, Frank, along with his brother, are charging up toward the front, and they decide to make a bid for the flag. And Frank Waller jumps down a few feet into where the Confederates are, and they're both holding it on. The Southerner, the Northerner, holding onto the flag, and Waller, my height, 5'8½", goes, and a powerful man though, rips the flag away from the Confederate soldier, and then decides he doesn't want to retreat to the rear. He wants to protect that flag, so he puts the flag on the ground, stands on the staff, picks his gun back up, and continues the fight. And only later during the fight did he then pick the flag up and turn it over to his commander, Rufus Dawes. He will be, during the Civil War, some 17 months after this action, be awarded the Medal of Honor for capturing that Confederate flag.
All right, now we are on the 2nd day battlefield here at Gettysburg. We're on the southern or left end of the Union line. This is maybe one of the most celebrated and visited parts of the Gettysburg battlefield, and a place where 2 Medals of Honor were earned. This area and this part of the battlefield also includes land in which Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, maybe one of the most best known and most celebrated soldiers of the American Civil War and a Medal of Honor recipient, fought with his unit, the 20th Maine. Now I'm going to read you the 2 citations for Chamberlain and Sergeant Andrew Jackson Tozier, who's the other soldier that we'll be talking about here. So for Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, who received his Medal of Honor in 1893, his citation, which is longer than the last one we read, the President of the United States of America, in the name of Congress, takes pleasure in presenting the Medal of Honor to Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, United States Army, for extraordinary heroism on 2 July 1863 while serving with 20th Maine Infantry in action at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, for daring heroism and great tenacity in holding his position on Little Round Top against repeated assaults and carrying the advanced position on the Great Round Top. Now, Sergeant Andrew Jackson Tozier, who served underneath Chamberlain, his is a little bit shorter. He receives his Medal of Honor in 1898. So his citation is, at the crisis of the engagement, this soldier, a color bearer, stood alone in an advanced position, the regiment having been borne back, and defended his colors with musket and ammunition picked up at his feet. So to learn a little bit more about the action here at Little Round Top on 2nd July 1863 and the history of these 2 soldiers, I'm going to turn it back over to Gary Edelman for a discussion of those actions. So Gary, take it away.
Thanks, Rob. So here we are, we're on Little Round Top. This is at the left flank of the Union fishhook position. See, it's shaped like a fishhook. I can show you. And here we are, July 2nd, 1863. It's the afternoon, and it's incredible. The end of the Union line happens to be right where the end of the Confederate line, Alabamians, meet it right over there. And on this spur of Little Round Top, there's going to be a fierce struggle. The Alabamians attack, they're repulsed. They attack again, they're repulsed again. But then they try to get around Chamberlain's line, off to the right of the camera. They're going to try to move behind his line. That is called flanking. Chamberlain sees this maneuver, and he's able to refuse or bend back his line. So when the Confederates come from another position, he's still facing them. Chamberlain is there. He's got his color sergeant Tozier there. Tozier supposedly only you're supposed to drop your gun and carry the flag. He manages to do both of them. He puts down his gun, grabs the flag, and then realizes he can actually keep that flag in the crook of his arm and keep shooting, which he does. This all happens for a time right behind me, right where the monument was later dedicated. And now we're going to bring on, he'll come up in a second, Wayne Motz from the National Civil War Museum in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, with something very special to show you.
Hi, Gary, thanks. I just want to show this beautiful top hat that's in the collection of the National Civil War Museum up in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It's a Knox hat from the state of New York. Very high quality top hat, and this top hat belonged to none other than Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain when he was governor of Maine. So he's governor of Maine between 1866 and 1870, and this hat's in the collection of the National Civil War Museum. Also remember, there's a second Medal of Honor recipient up here on the Vincent Spur, Little Round Top, and that's Andrew Jackson Tozier. And Chamberlain and Tozier are sort of interconnected because Tozier is the color sergeant here for the 20th Maine for July 2nd, 1863. He's 25 years old. He's born in Maine, and he was one of those second Maine, what everybody calls the mutineers. I don't think that's quite an accurate term, but these are men that were for 2 years of enlistment, and now they're going to get put into, they're in a 2-year enlistment regiment, now they're going to be put in for 3 years, and Andrew Tozier is one of those. So Chamberlain makes him the color sergeant of the 20th Maine, gives him the flag to unify the regiment, and on July 2nd, 1863, Andrew Tozier is right over here behind me, and he's holding that flag in the ground, in the crux of his arm, firing at the Confederates on July 2nd, 1863, in the middle of this action. He survives the American Civil War, but unfortunately, in 1865, he actually breaks in to a store. He goes on to a crime spree, he and his brother, and he's convicted and gets a 5-year sentence. And who pardons him? Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, only a few months into his sentence. And actually, Tozier comes to live with the Chamberlain family for a little bit of time. So Andrew Jackson Tozier, Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, very well connected here, not just in the Battle of Gettysburg, but later on. Tozier dies in 1910. Of course, we know Chamberlain dies in 1914.
All right, we're here now on the Devil's Den. The Devil's Den is a key part of the second day of battle here at Gettysburg, and it's a place where we're going to talk about another Medal of Honor recipient, Harvey Munsell of the 99th Pennsylvania, and we have the 99th Pennsylvania monument right behind us here. Before I turn it over to Gary, though, I'm going to read his unusual citation. Again, it's short and brief. What makes it interesting is that it has a parenthesis. It's almost longer than the first sentence, and it does reference some of his combat that goes beyond Gettysburg. In fact, he's one of the few recipients even here whose citation spans all 3 days. So here it is for Harvey Munsell. Gallant and courageous conduct as color bearer. This non-commissioned officer carried the colors of his regiment through 13 engagements. So to talk more about the battle here at Devil's Den and Harvey Munsell, I'm going to turn it over to Gary Edelman.
Thanks, Rob. So as Rob said, July 2nd, 1863, that's Little Round Top behind me, and we are atop Devil's Den, and these fights are completely connected, and they overlap one another. But let me back up for a second. This is July 2nd, and on that day, the Confederates are over in this direction, okay? That's Seminary Ridge across the way. They launch a massive attack that'll total more than 15,000 soldiers, okay? And the right of their line is going to hit the Devil's Den and Little Round Top over there. The Union has a large brigade here. That's several regiments under the command of a guy named Ward, and one of those regiments is the 99th Pennsylvania, who is positioned off in these woods that you can see over there. In the meantime, they're in the woods. The Confederates show up. They capture Devil's Den. They start to sort of fall back from Devil's Den, and they're threatening of taking it again when the 99th Pennsylvania is ordered to leave those woods and come out to this position here, which they do, they show up on top in a very precarious, dangerous position and face toward Little Round Top with another main troops with their back to them facing off toward the Confederate position on Seminary Ridge. This is intense, okay? So let's talk about those Pennsylvanians. They're facing that way, and every regiment has a flag, the colors in the middle, and the color bearer that day is Harvey May Munsell. He's standing up there, he's seeing the Confederates push on below him, he sees them coming behind, and he said his teeth were chattering like old Gil. He said his heart was in his boots or in his head, and he didn't know which. And he said that it took a while for him to realize that he was not the only person in the regiment that wasn't frightened, completely out of his wits. Everybody was scared. He said they all looked like ghosts, but he stood there firm with his flag as the Confederates began to advance. The Confederates, with the weight of some Georgians helping them, capture the top of Devil's Den, and the Pennsylvanians begin to fall back. While falling back, clutching his flag, the shells start to explode around him. One explodes near Munsell's feet, okay? And it explodes, causes a hole, and he pitches forward into it onto his flag, semi-conscious. He realized what's happening. The hole is kind of deep. He kind of rolls over on it and plays dead for a while the Confederates are shooting over his head at the Yankees retreating. There he sat there, playing dead, playing possum for a while until the Confederates fell back and the Union advanced, and he hopped up, brought the flag back to his unit, and that is in part for that act, for that courageousness and for preserving that flag, he will be awarded the Medal of Honor in 1866.
Well, now we're here on Cemetery Ridge, the center of the Gettysburg battlefield and the site really of the climax of this famous battle. It's here that Pickett's charge crests, sometimes called the high water of the Confederacy. And we're here to talk about a number of different Medal of Honor recipients who fought in this region. But first, we're going to start with Lieutenant Alonzo Cushing. Here's his monument right here. He is the 64th Medal of Honor recipient here. And what's interesting about his Medal of Honor is that he earned his Medal of Honor, or at least he received his Medal of Honor 151 years after he died here on the battlefield. So Cushing, or a distant relative of Alonzo Cushing, received the Medal of Honor from President Barack Obama in 2014 in a White House ceremony. So we're still finding and still seeing Medal of Honor recipients even in today's time. What also makes Cushing interesting and unique amongst the 64 Medal of Honor recipients is that he is the only one of the 64 who dies here at the Battle of Gettysburg. We know in modern times that the percentage of posthumous awards for Medal of Honor recipients is actually quite high, but here in the Civil War, and interesting enough for Gettysburg, the bloodiest battle of the Civil War, only one of the 64 will die. I'm going to actually invite Doug Dowds from the United States War College to talk about Alonzo Cushing and his actions here. Thanks, Doug.
Good afternoon. So here we are on July 3rd. During the bombardment, when we think about Longstreet's assault or Pickett's charge, Alonzo Cushing's battery is here. He's got 6 3-inch ordnance rifles. During the bombardment, his cannons are returning fire. In this time, he is wounded in the shoulder. He has also received an abdomen wound, which means basically he gets castrated. In fact, he'll be holding his intestines with his left hand. He's ordered off the field and refuses to go. His good Sergeant Fugger will pick him up wherever he wants to go, and wherever he sets Cushing for more than a minute or two, soon there's a puddle of blood beneath his feet. 3 of his caissons go off high order. 4 of his pieces are ruined. In fact, one of his last remaining 2 pieces loses part of a wheel, and his cannoneers go, look, that's it. He'll draw his pistol and he'll go change that wheel, and they'll make sure that he holds him to the standard in the midst of this bombardment. Ultimately, he will roll his last 2 pieces up to the wall, and as the Confederates are 100 yards away, he's holding the lanyard of one of his last pieces of canister. When the Confederates fire their first volley, a round will go down his mouth, and he will be killed. So at this point, I'd like to bring in Wayne Motts, the CEO of the National Civil War Museum in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, with a piece of gear he has on. Wayne.
Thank you so much, Doug. This is the original belt that belonged to Alonzo Cushing in the collection of the National Civil War Museum up in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. See, how do you know it's Alonzo Cushing's? Well, just look, it's got A.H. Cushing right onto the belt. There is a photograph of Cushing wearing this design belt right after the Battle of Antietam. So I really firmly believe this is the belt that he wore in the Gettysburg campaign, in the battle. There's also some dark spots on it, Doug. We can't say for certain, but it may also relate to these bloody wounds that Cushing had here in the Battle of Gettysburg. What an unbelievable piece for us to have at the National Civil War Museum.
One of the other Medal of Honor recipients from the final day, July 3rd, 1863, is Corporal Joseph de Castro of the 19th Massachusetts Infantry, and he fought right here on Cemetery Ridge. His Medal of Honor is awarded in December of 1864, and his citation reads, "Capture of Flag of 19th Virginia Regiment," which makes de Castro interesting to us. He's also the first Hispanic Medal of Honor recipient in our nation's history. To talk a little bit more about the action here on this ground, we'll turn it back over to Gary Edelman to speak about Pickett's charge and the actions of de Castro.
Before de Castro can get into action to perform his valiant service in this case, you have to know we're on the Union line here. It's straight, sort of like this. And the Confederates are almost a mile away in the most distant tree line you see over there. The Confederates at that point, after a huge bombardment, begin the most famous attack of the Civil War, and some might say in American history, Pickett's charge. That's what we call it today. The Confederates inexorably move on to the road behind me, where maybe you can see some sturdy wooden fences. Some of them cross that fence and begin a final charge up this ridge toward this position where the Union line begins to buckle. Regiments are running, cannons are silent, the Confederates are puncturing the Union line. But luckily for the Union commander, George Gordon Meade, has ordered 5, 10, 20,000 reinforcements to converge near the center of the line. And one of those particular units is a Massachusetts unit, one of the first to arrive, the 19th Massachusetts. They're over in this position, and to talk a little bit more about them and de Castro is Doug Dowds, U.S. Army War College licensed battlefield guide.
So once the Confederates break through, we're at the climax of this attack, and one of those regiments that Gary talks about is the 19th Massachusetts. They're going to counterattack through these copse of trees. In fact, Colonel Devereaux, the commander of the 19th Mass, would write, "Foot to foot, body to body, man to man, struggling, pushing, striving, killing, covered in sweat, black with smoke, red with blood." In that copse of trees, men with clubbed muskets and thrown fists and thrown rocks will have at one another, and it's during this fight that Corporal de Castro will see the flag bearer of the 14th Virginia. He will rush over, and with his flagstaff, he will attack the flag bearer of the 14th. He will grab their flag, rush it back to Colonel Devereaux, hand it to his commander without saying a word, and then like a good trooper get right back in line to carry his flag. And of course, all that happens right here.
The next Medal of Honor recipient that we're going to talk about is one of 2 generals to receive the Medal of Honor here during the Battle of Gettysburg, Brigadier General Alexander Webb. Here, with his units, he is also fighting against the Confederate assault that is washing up onto the crest here of Cemetery Ridge. Now, what's interesting about Alexander Webb is he not only has a very distinguished career during the Civil War, but he also has a very fascinating post-war career that we'll talk a little about later. But first, let me highlight his citation. He earns the Medal of Honor, or is presented the Medal of Honor in September of 1891. So his citation reads, "Distinguished personal gallantry in leading his men forward at a critical period in the contest." And to learn more about that contest and Webb's contributions, again, I'm going to turn it over to Doug Dowd.
So imagine Webb is new to brigade command. He's only taken command on the 28th of June. He's taken over for Brigadier General Paddy Owen, and now all of a sudden a New Yorker is leading these Philadelphia Irishmen. This doesn't go over very well when they first get here. But it is during the bombardment, in the prelude to Pickett's charge or Longstreet's assault, that Webb, an artillerist by trade, will walk out in front of the line and lean against his sword, and the men understand how brave he truly is. Now, as an artillerist, he actually has figured out that's probably one of the safest places to be. But nonetheless, he now has established his credibility. During the height of this attack, when some of the regiments will pull back and now the Confederates will spill over the wall, Webb will recognize the time for a counterattack. He will go to the 72nd Pennsylvania and get them to move forward, and when they don't, he'll actually go to the flag bearer and grab the flag to try and get him to go forward, and the flag bearer, not recognizing their new brigade commander, will shuffle him off. Finally, just horrified at that prospect, Webb will walk forward and he'll join the fight with the 69th Pennsylvania. Now, when we talk about Webb leading that day, of course his symbol of command would be his sword. I'm going to bring on Wayne Motts, the CEO of the National Civil War Museum in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Wayne.
Hi, Doug. Thank you very much. This would have been the sword, I believe, that Alexander Stuart Webb had here while he was at Gettysburg. This is a model 1860 field and staff sword. It's actually inscribed to him right here on the hilt. It's a Tiffany-made sword, so it's made in New York. Webb was born in 1835. He's 28 years old here in the Battle of Gettysburg. And the reason why I think this is the sword that he had here at Gettysburg is because, as Doug just said, he comes right out of the artillery. He's an artillery inspector. This is the field and staff sword he would have had as an artillery inspector. And unless he gets a new sword between June 28th and July 3rd, this most certainly is the symbol of command he's carrying at Gettysburg. He's wounded in the thigh. He does, of course, receive the Medal of Honor. And in 1870, he leaves the Army and becomes the president of the City College of New York. And he and his brother, interesting fact, are one of the founders, and he's the first president of the Westminster Kennel Club for dogs. And Alexander Stuart Webb is buried. He died in 1911. He's buried at West Point, in the West Point Cemetery.
All right, we are now in the Soldiers National Cemetery in Gettysburg, and it's somewhat fitting that we're here as our final stop, because here is the gravestone for Captain William Miller of the 3rd Pennsylvania Cavalry. He is one of the 64 Medal of Honor recipients and the only Gettysburg Medal of Honor recipient buried here. And you can see again the Medal of Honor emblem and the title here, which is typical of many of the headstones that Medal of Honor recipients have throughout the country. Now I'll read you William Miller's citation. Again, he's a cavalryman. So, without orders, led a charge of his squadron upon the flank of the enemy, checked his attack, and cut off and dispersed the rear of his column. So that's quite an action-packed citation. I'm going to let Doug Dowd kind of talk about William Miller and his great exploits here at Gettysburg.
So Captain William Miller joins the 3rd Pennsylvania Cavalry in 1861. The 3rd Pennsylvania Cavalry is in all the engagements that the Army of the Potomac Cavalry has against Confederate cavalry to this point in the war. Now what he's going to do is he's going to find himself on July 3rd out at East Cavalry Field, about 3 miles east of the battlefield at Gettysburg. After the July 3rd chess moves that characterize a normal cavalry battlefield, finally Jeb Stuart will launch his coup de main with a large column led by Wade Hampton charging across the field. At that time, Captain William Miller is responsible for 4 squadrons, and their job is to guard the Low Dutch Road, and his orders are, don't leave this position. During the climax of this battle, as Union troops charge into the front of this column, they stop it. And with that, all of a sudden, Captain William Miller will see an opportunity. He'll turn to his lieutenant, as happened on many a battlefield throughout history, and he says, "Lieutenant, tell them at my court-martial this was a good idea." The lieutenant salutes and says, "Aye, aye, 3 bags full." And with that, the 4 squadrons will charge out, cut into the back third of that Confederate cavalry line. And that's what breaks the back of this Confederate cavalry charge. As the Confederates look behind them and see Union soldiers behind them, they will now start to retreat back across the field, and that's what allows them to secure the very right side of the Union line out on that East Cavalry Field. Of course, he goes right back to service and will serve all the way through 1864. We'll go back to his home up in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and open up a hardware store. A good citizen, he will become a congressperson to the state of Pennsylvania, and it won't be until 1897 that they recognize his exploits on July 3rd, 1863. I'm going to turn it back over to Rob to go ahead and close out our day here.
Well, thank you, Doug. Again, this concludes our trip to the Gettysburg battlefield and our talk about Medal of Honor recipients in this famous Civil War battle. I think all of these 64 Medal of Honor recipients that we've talked about here for this famous battle are just part of the 1,523 Medal of Honor recipients that happened during the American Civil War. So almost 43% of all Medals of Honor were awarded to soldiers who fought in this great conflict. I want to thank Gary Edelman, Doug Dowds, Wayne, and Chris, our cameraman, for all the help today. And I hope you enjoyed kind of learning about the Medal of Honor and this American Civil War battlefield. Thank you.